to be talking about how to receive feedback in graduate school. So feel free to, here's just some guidelines. If you can, mute yourself while you're not speaking, but if you want to speak, please unmute yourself to do so. I also have turned on the Zoom captions, so if that's something you'd like, just click the live transcript button at the bottom, and you can see the transcript pop up if you'd like to view it that way too. And we are going to record this session, but your name won't be shown on the recording if that's something you're concerned about. So with that, we'll get started. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to talk about today. So specifically, we're going to talk about what is graduate school feedback. So it's always good to define your terms first. Then we're going to talk about what makes feedback hard to receive, especially in graduate school. And then finally, we'll talk about strategies you can use to receive and use that feedback well. So just at first, before I jump too deeply into the topic, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows I'm just talking about appropriate feedback in grad school. If you have some kind of experience where you feel it's inappropriate, please do reach out to the Dean of Students or other CG personnel. But what we're talking about today is appropriate feedback in grad school. So I always want to throw that caution out there. All right, so let's jump right in. We're going to talk about what is grad school feedback. So first, let's just go over some of the types of feedback that you're going to receive or have already started to receive in grad school. So there's the friendly peer review. So if you give it to another student or a colleague and they give you some informal feedback on a piece of writing, or if you practice a presentation in front of someone, that can be written or oral feedback, and it's pretty low stakes. There's also conference presentations. These can be a little bit higher stakes, but still it's a good time to practice getting feedback and stuff like that. Now, what quality feedback you'll receive from a conference presentation can vary widely, especially based on your discipline. I know that sometimes I get more comments than anything else in conference presentations instead of feedback. There's also article submissions. So if you're submitting to, journal articles or anything like that, you'll get feedback from reviewers. There's also grades. So these are a little bit more high stakes. You'll get grades from professors for doing assignments or for your overall feedback or your overall performance for a semester. There's also, just advisor and committee feedback. So if you're submitting a draft of your thesis or your dissertation, or it might just be that you're meeting with them to talk about a project and they can give you feedback in that moment. So this isn't everything for types of feedback in grad school. What other kind of thing or types of feedback do you think that you have received or you will receive in feedback? And you can just put it in the chat or shout it out. I know I haven't covered everything. And Shamini, feel free to jump into class discussions, yeah. Right? Yeah, that's immediate feedback right there in class for sure.
I'm thinking of group work, where projects you get feedback from. I guess it's in the realm of friendly peer review, but it's like a specific group work thing.
Yeah, it is a little different because you're both or all of you are working on a particular project. Yeah, for sure. Team performance evaluations. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. That can also happen if you're working in a lab on a project yeah. Right, exactly. So basically what the point of this is to show how many different areas of feedback there are in graduate school. They can be, again, written, they can be orally given to you, they can be high stakes, they can be low stakes. And the quality of feedback you're going to get is going to vary widely depending on who it's from and what the situation is. And also how important that feedback is will also vary greatly. But that being said, hopefully what I have for you today will apply to all of that different type of feedback. So you can use this strategy no matter what type of feedback you're getting. You might have to modify it just a little bit, but it should be pretty useful for all of that. All right. So let's talk about just briefly, what's the point of feedback in school, in graduate school? Because sometimes it's good to remember just the very basics. So one of the things that I've identified, I think is most important is learning and growth. I think sometimes we can forget what the point is, and feedback can almost seem like a barrier, especially for, for classes and stuff like that. Or for if you're writing your proposal or something like that, you're like, oh, now I have to integrate all this feedback, and you can forget, and it can feel like a barrier instead of the whole point is to learn and grow. Feedback also helps you identify, your main points and make sure that other people are understanding what you're trying to get across. I know in arts and humanities, in religious studies, that's where my work is. We have big concepts sometimes, and sometimes they don't always come across well. And so sometimes you just need to refine how you're getting those points across. You can also identify weak spots in your writing. That can be very useful. And getting new ideas can also come out of feedback in a really great way. I think that's my favorite part of feedback, is the new ideas part. So, someone will say, well, have you read so-and-so? I'm like, no, I haven't. And then that's a really great way to jump off into a new area or make new connections. And making new connections and new ideas is exactly what grad school is about. So feedback is great for that. It can also correct errors in logic or even your process. So if you're doing a research study, maybe there's part of the process needs to be refined. Or, for instance, your argument has a weak spot that you haven't noticed before. So all of these are ways that feedback can help. But overall, it's all about just learning and getting better. And that's hard to remember sometimes, but essentially feedback is the very thing we're trying to do in grad school, and it's so central. So just a quick review of that. I know it's a basic concept, but sometimes we all need a reminder. I know I do sometimes. Okay. So what makes feedback hard to receive sometimes? This is kind of a difficult topic for some people. I know that it took me a while to learn how to receive feedback in grad school. So let's talk about kind of what makes it hard sometimes. So first, I want to just take a minute to do a quick reflection and really think about the questions I'm going to ask, because everyone's answer will be different. So first, think of a time you received feedback in grad school or in any place really, and you felt positive and empowered afterwards, and you were excited to move forward. And then I also want you to think of a time you received feedback and afterwards you felt pessimistic or disempowered and you didn't really want to move forward. So let's take just a minute and pull up 2 of those times for yourself, and you can jot them down or just think about it, but think about what those were. So, I'm going to continue to chat just a little bit while you all think, so you don't actually have to listen to me here. But so, what was the difference in your mindset at that time? Or was there a difference in your mindset? How are these 2 situations different? And I know it's probably a lot easier to think about the time where you felt pessimistic or disempowered. I know it is for me than when you feel empowered. But okay, I'll stop chatting and give you a second to think. All right. Does anyone need more time, or do you think you've got your two situations? Good. All right. So when you're thinking about it, was there what was the difference between those 2 situations? Was there a difference in your mindset about the project? Did you care about one project more than the other? How was the feedback framed? Were you more confident about the topic or your skills in one situation than the other? And what was kind of your internal narrative about the feedback? So if you feel free or up to it, we would love to hear from you verbally or in the chat, and just kind of walk us through like what was the difference between these two situations. Okay, so the negative effect feedback involved not first listening to what I was trying to do, while the positive started with my being able to explain my goals first, right? So it, let's see. So they misunderstood what the whole point of it was in the first place, right?
Yeah, I worked with a professor who would just listen to the first sentence and then start throwing, well, you should do this and talk to this person and do this. And by the end, I just was like completely scattered. For myself, I sometimes need someone to help me to narrow down rather than to add a whole bunch of crazy sort of unrelated things. And the professor I worked with, who was really helpful, was able to listen to what I was saying and then help me to focus in on what was doable in that project. That made a big difference. I didn't think about that until we just did this. Like that was actually the difference between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. That's a great realization. Like, and it is really important, right? So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but faculty aren't really trained in giving feedback often, just like we're not trained to receive feedback very often. So, so sometimes, and we can talk this a bit about this later, but sometimes just stating what you need before you get the feedback can help them. But sometimes people already have their style and you just have to try and figure out how to work with what they're giving you. But that is one of the big problems in, not like a big problem, but one of the hard things in grad school is like narrowing down a topic for a dissertation, which could explode into a lifetime worth of work. Those are hard things to do. Okay, we got another one. So positive feedback felt like a collaboration with someone invested in me and what I'm doing. Negative feedback was in a formal performance evaluation setting and felt like a surprise hit as it had never been mentioned. Yeah, and this is in a job setting. This is important. So this could be job feedback as well as grad school feedback, right? So yeah, and that is something. So it seems like what I'm hearing is a lot of you all feel like it's the way in which feedback is given that can really make an impact on how it's received, for sure. So one of the things we're going to try and talk about in this webinar is even using that feedback that's not high quality and then still trying to make that work for you so that you can still use that in a positive way to turn it around, because it is really difficult to get feedback that's not constructive or that seems to come out of left field. And then what do you do with that, right? How do you process that? How do you move on in that way? Anything else you want to add, Shamini?
One thing I'm seeing in both the comments here is the fact that the good feedback focused on the person who was getting the feedback. It's about collaboration, someone invested in me, listening to what my goals were. And maybe, well, I know we'll get to it later, but the whole idea, one of the strategies there is then how do you try and manage that preemptively? Like Shelby said earlier, stating your goals up front, sending a prior email before getting there to say, I'm interested, or having questions to ask that will. Well, one thing I do know is we have no control over the other person. So the only thing here coming out of these two stories is what is the control I can have over my process? This is what Shelby was saying. And maybe a piece of that is how do I control a little bit of the communication with the other person by using questions and preemptive framing. But I think these are really good stories because it points to that idea that we have to take charge of it.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so I have a couple more slides on like what makes feedback hard to receive, and then we'll get right into the strategies. we're already starting to talk about it a little bit. So what makes feedback hard to receive? And I think more than anything, it can hurt, right? It can hurt. But why is that? Why do sometimes when we get that feedback, it can actually feel like a physical, like, you feel it in your stomach, or you feel it as anxiety or stress, and it's from those emotions, right? So feedback, especially in graduate school, is hard because it's going to challenge how we think about ourselves, especially on a topic that's important to us. So grad school is important to us, right? It's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of time. And so it's something that's really important to us. And hearing something that challenges our sense of self, so we all think we're capable and good at what we do, or hopefully everyone does. And so anything that challenges that, it can be really hard to deal with because we're so invested. And it can make us doubt ourselves of like, oh, well, I mean, there's what's it called in grad school? Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
Like, you knew what I was talking about. So like, do I belong here? Am I really good at this? It can be really difficult for all of those reasons, because especially in grad school, we have our identities. Often, this isn't always the case, but often our identities and our sense of worth becomes entangled with, our progress in the program and the work that we produce. So if it's entangled too closely, then it can really make it hard to hear that feedback. And something else is that feedback is something that usually happens behind the scenes. So it makes me think of those Instagram pictures that look so amazing on Instagram or, on Facebook. And then they do the zoom out shot and they're like, I don't know, on a street corner somewhere with gross cars and stuff in the background, but you just see this little tiny picture. Feedback's kind of like that. You don't see all of the feedback and revisions that other people have had to go through to get their work to that great place. And it can lead to us comparing ourselves to others. So we only see the nice finished product, but we haven't seen all of the feedback that they've gotten and had to go through too. So it can be hard to remember that. We don't see all the rejection letters from journals that our tenured faculty have gotten. So, it can be hard. Like I know this faculty who keeps a binder of all of the rejection letters from journals that they've gotten and stuff like conferences and stuff, because grad students don't get to see that, and it can be a reminder that you have to do all of this, I think also sometimes of, books that are really famous now and that got rejected over and over and over again, but then they finally got published, but you don't see all the rejections, right? Because that's done in private, behind the closed doors, one-on-one. And so because of all that, because feedback isn't this public thing that happens so often, it can be hard to remember that everyone is going through this. Even those that have already gotten, their tenure track positions, or people who are executives or whatever, like they've gone through all this too and are still going through it. And that's hard to remember. So how do we move forward with all these emotions that can be kind of hard to do? So first is remembering that receiving feedback is a skill. Giving feedback is a skill too. That's beyond what we're going to talk about today. But receiving feedback is something you can work on. So no matter what kind of feedback you do get, you can do something useful with it. And it's a skill that if you practice, you can get better at recovering quickly when you do have negative emotions from feedback, and then learning more from the feedback you get, no matter if it's great, like good quality feedback or not. So let's see, did I already talk through all my points? Oh, yeah. And of course, this is a skill that will serve you not only in graduate school, but also in a future career, because you're going to be receiving feedback for the rest of your life, whether you want it or not. And that can be, feedback from peer reviews. If you go on to academia, it can be job performance evaluations. It's just part of everyday life. And it's something you should seek out, right? If you want to improve as a person, no matter what you're working on, you want to get that feedback. And then, again, most professors aren't taught how to give feedback formally. That's why, I'm with the Preparing Future Faculty program, and We try and give some of that formal training to professors because they don't get it. But it's also important that even if they don't have it, you can grow the skill yourself. And that way you can deal with feedback better. Let's see. So I'm going to go over in the next couple of slides some strategies that you can use to receive feedback, especially if it's hard to hear. And it's the process itself. The more you get feedback and like practice these processes, the easier it will get. So just doing it over and over, and you're going to receive a lot of feedback in grad school and for the rest of your life, right? But as you do it more frequently, you will get much better at it. And again, I've said this a couple times, but this is one of the skills of grad school that's like an invisible skill. We don't talk about receiving feedback very often as a skill, but it really, really is. And it's a skill that can really, if you get those that are not good at receiving feedback well, will have a harder time, in their careers and in graduate school. So it's really one of those vital things that I feel like we should almost have a class about on your first year, but there's always so much to go over, right? And not enough time. So, okay. So here's the strategy on how to receive feedback well. So this is something that I adapted from the University of Washington, but I adapted it specifically for receiving feedback in graduate school. So this is a series of steps that you can use anytime for any of those types of feedback we talked about. Sometimes you might not need all of these steps, but it's good to know what they are so you can use them when you need them. And again, if the more you practice this, the easier it will be going forward. Every time you get feedback, it'll be a little bit easier, right? So we're going to go through these one by one, but I'll give you just a second if you want to jot them down real quick. And this is also any questions over what I've kind of covered so far or comments before we get really deep into the strategies. All right, then we'll just keep trucking through it here. So the first step might seem obvious, might not, is to read all of the feedback first. So especially if it's a paper, and it can be hard to do, right? Like is not to, so don't dwell on any one particular part. So what you want to do when you get your paper first is just to read completely through all of the comments and just kind of let it soak in a bit. So if you are getting feedback in a meeting or something, I would suggest the equivalent of this would be just to write down the feedback as objectively and quickly as you can as they're giving it, right? So just write down everything. Don't try and figure out like what's the most important thing they're saying or anything at that time. It's like an information dump, right? You just want to get all of it out there and read it. So later after your meeting, if it's an oral exchange, you want to just read through all of your notes at first. So that's just the first step, because sometimes, you can read the first part, or if it's an email or something, read the first paragraph and then you're upset and you haven't read the second paragraph that says all the good things or everything else. So just make sure, read all of it through once. And that's just the first step. But then the second step is not action. So that's not moving on to action immediately. What you should do after you read it all is actually sit and try to identify what you're feeling. Now, I want you to do this even if you're feeling great about the feedback, because that's important information too, right? Because it's not just for the negative emotions you might be feeling. So what you want to do is really just stop. Sometimes that can be jotting down your feelings, just grab a Post-it, slap it on there and write down what you're feeling. It can, or a separate journal if you have that, like a research journal or anything like that, and just see how you're feeling about the feedback that you're getting. So it can be a wide range of emotions. You might feel overwhelmed. You might feel really excited. You might feel like, oh gosh, this is going to take so much longer than I thought. Like there's so many different feelings that I know I have felt from receiving feedback that just across the board, right? could be super excited of like, oh, I've never thought of this idea before. So they can be a wide range of feelings, but it's important to identify what those are, because that's going to help you realize how you're feeling about the project itself, right? So
And
feeling, go ahead.
This one for me has been a big one in my process, because for me, whenever I stop and identify my feeling, it has actually helped me figure out what my action is going to be. Maybe like if I'm feeling overwhelmed, then I might think, well, what do I do about like feeling less overwhelmed? It truly has helped me find the next move. So I can't say enough about how important this step is.
Yeah, well, that reminds me of what I was going to say is emotion is really discounted in education, and we shouldn't, because it is an integral part of learning, right? So how you're feeling about your topic, how you're feeling about your work is really important to how well you do. It's important for how much you're going to learn from that particular assignment or project. Like it's actually a really integrated part of your journey as a scholar, right? And so we need to pay attention to those things. And there's a whole field of emotion in learning that Shamini can probably speak to more than I can. But there's whole fields of research on this about how much feelings impact learning. So anyway, it's very important. Okay, so a couple of things so on this step, we're going to talk about some of the details of this step. So how do you deal with those hard emotions if the emotions are hard? You might not need this. If it's all positive emotions, you can probably skip all this. But if they are negative, how do we address those before we dive into those revisions or taking that feedback? So first, quality feedback should not be a judgment on your personality or your like ability to do anything in the future, right? It should only be focused on a specific task or project or idea. It should be very focused. And so how, like the story we tell ourselves about the feedback we receive is going to be really impactful on how we feel about it. So, are we saying like, they're giving me feedback and it's that imposter syndrome again, and I don't belong here, and this is all about me? Or are you, comparing yourselves to others, saying, well, everyone in the class didn't get that comment, it was just me? But that's a story we are telling ourselves. It's not, try to separate the judgment on you as a person from the judgment on a particular idea or a piece of work or writing. That can be really hard to do, but with practice, it can get easier. You are not your paper or your writing. There is a difference between you and what you have produced or made. And it can be hard to remember sometimes because, again, we're really invested in what we're doing, right? But it's important to remember also that no one is perfect and everyone is getting feedback all of the time. We give feedback to our faculty members at the end of the semester, every semester for those classes too. So the thing to pay attention to is, what is the story that you're telling yourself about that actual feedback you received? So one of the best ways to deal with that is to reframe your self-talk. So if you find yourself saying, my writing is not strong enough for me to belong at this level, well, what we need to do is then, identify that, because that was the step, and then say, wait, I'm in the PhD program for a reason. I got accepted for a reason. Learning is part of the process. And I think we often forget that graduate school is the training. Like sometimes I know that's weird to say, but like we are here to practice to get better. And we shouldn't expect we're going to be right at that level all of a sudden, right? We're not coming in at that high level. We are here to get to that high level. So for instance, if you find yourself saying, oh my gosh, this person must think I'm completely incompetent because I made this mistake, just stop yourself and go, wait, this person is helping me see what I couldn't see. And now I'll know for next time. So that's like the growth mindset, right? So you might not be there yet, but you're here to get there. That's the whole point of grad school, is that we are here to train and to practice. So even if you aren't there yet, that's fine. That's where you should be, right? So even if you aren't at a particular place you want to be yet, that's okay. We're here. We are working with people to help us get there. And grad school is for training. Yes. And it's hard to remember though, right? Because we already feel like we should be there at this level because we're working with people that might be at a higher level than us. But the whole point of grad school is to help us get there.
I feel we need a t-shirt.
T-shirt.
It's such a good, or a meme, it's really powerful.
Yeah, I really like to think of grad school as practice. And we forget that. We forget we're here to practice. We aren't here to be at that level yet. It's great if we are, but that's...
Well, then we already have then
why are we paying the money if we can already do all this? We're completely ready and trained, And then the last bit of this particular step is, I think one of the most important things is the idea of resiliency and growth mindset. So again, it's that idea of, I'm not there yet. It doesn't mean I can't get there. It doesn't mean it won't be ready. It doesn't mean that it's not going to, but not yet is okay. It's a great place to be. Writing is never done. It's just due. I love this quote. I have no idea where it comes from, but writing is never done. It's just due. What they say about, for instance, dissertation is the best dissertation is a done dissertation. There is no such thing as a perfect dissertation, because as soon as you turn it in, you're going to open it and see an error. I've done this for my master's thesis. I opened that, you get it and it's a nice bound, like really professional looking thing. I opened it up and I was like, well, there's a typo. Just wanted to throw it over my shoulder. So that's going to happen, right? But
that was my dissertation. Yeah.
Yeah, it happened to you too, right? So those things happen. It's just due, right? But I got so much learning and produced new knowledge from that thing. It wasn't just, there always are going to be errors. So don't focus on what you did wrong in the past. Focus how you're going to grow in the next draft or project. So it's just this idea that no one is perfect, even my professor, right? I'm just going to get better and better and better. And this is something that doesn't stop even when you graduate with your PhD. Because even when you graduate or your master's or whatever, you're not done. No one is done, right? In academia, you're always going to be getting feedback for everything you do, right? And if you're not, there's something wrong. If you're not getting feedback that says you should do this different, then you're not growing, you're not learning. And again, grad school is all about practicing and getting better. That's what we're here for. Okay, so to the next step, and that is stepping away. So after you've identified your emotions, just step away. It's the same process as when you're writing your first draft of your paper and then you set it aside before you go and revise it. You need to step away for just a minute, and you can do this step 2 and step 3 in the same time. Step away and look at your emotions at the same time. But you need to just get a little space so you can get perspective, think about the big picture, and make sure you're not dealing with the raw emotions right as you're diving in to all of those revisions or changes right away. The next step is to find your people. And what I mean, I'm not saying your advisor is not your people, but I mean, find your support group that's not your advisor or your committee. And I think it's important to differentiate the two. So, friends, family, a mentor, your other students, colleagues. So just take a second and write down all the people you think you could talk to when you're in this situation. So anyone you think could help you talk about your emotions to see what you're feeling, anyone you think could help you refocus on all the positive progress you've made so far, or someone that just can commiserate with you about how hard feedback can be to receive in grad school. So we want to find our people. And one of the ways you can do that is through using some of these resources. So these are resources we have at CGU. One of them is the Center for Writing and Rhetoric. So you can actually use them in 2 different ways. Yes, is a writing group. So you can go to their website and they will plug you into a writing group. And these are great. I've done these a few times, and they can really help you make progress on a particular piece of writing or just general, because grad school is different than undergrad. You're not set up with peer groups sometimes quite as easily. For thesis also, yes, they do have writing groups for thesis. And you can also, so writing groups are different from the dissertation boot camps. So these are groups that meet more frequently, and it's just a student group. Mine was an informal group that came out of one of my classes. But you can definitely use those group for a thesis. Absolutely.
Also, it's a newer thing at CWR, but they actually are also starting study groups. So it's worthwhile, if you're not sure, just approaching them and saying what you need and see what they have. And for me, a lot of it actually just came out of my classes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But sometimes some of my classes didn't have that connection with other people, so it wouldn't have worked like that. It was just a few of my classes. And then also, it's good to note that some of the best feedback and ideas I've gotten have come from other students, to be quite honest. Like some of the best, when I was working on my qualifying exams, the advice I got from other students was sometimes much more valuable than the advice I actually got from my faculty. Not that the faculty weren't helpful, but it's been 30 years since they worked on their qualifying exams, so they forget what it's like, But they have they're more thinking about the big ideas, right? And sometimes you just need some on the ground advice of how do I actually study for this? Yeah, and you can make an appointment, of course, to talk to. I know students who set up a reoccurring. I don't know if they still allow this even, but a reoccurring appointment once a week to just go over whatever their current project is. And you can make appointments for any part of the writing process. So you can make an appointment for when you're brainstorming your project, when you are wanting someone to look over a full draft, or when you've gotten your feedback and you're like, wait, now I have 18 pages of feedback. What do I do with this? So they're a great resource for that. Also, I can't help but mention the Mansour counseling service. Grad school is hard, and I want to be clear that people are more frequently to have the needs for counseling in graduate school than almost any other time in your life. So this is just a thing for grad school. So you can, as a student, you can have free sessions. I think they offer free 6 sessions per semester. Not to mention that we're in COVID and on lockdown and all this other stuff. So that is a resource I highly recommend. They have group counseling and they have individual counseling. So I think they even have a counseling group, last time I looked, that was on study methods and strategies and stuff like that. So it really spans the whole gamut of what you're looking for. And then, of course, the Claremont College's library. Talk to a librarian. They're great researchers. They can help you. They can help you find new sources. They can help you with feedback and stuff as well. So if you get a vague, you need more on this topic, go to a librarian. They can help you, right? So those are the main resources I would suggest you use after you have received feedback, especially. And let me share in the chat a link to all these things just in case you all want them. So those links will actually work if you click on them, I think. Excuse me. Okay, so the final step is return to the feedback. So once you've done all the other steps, you need to come back to the feedback, and then we're going to make progress on that feedback. So you should have already read everything, then identified what you were feeling, taken some time away, and reached out for help if you needed it. Now it's time to come back to the feedback. And the first step of this is going to be so read the feedback again, all of it, right? So this is the return part. So read it all through again, and then objectively analyze the feedback. So this means, do the emotional work that you've already done, and then prioritize look for and find 5 of the most important ideas in the feedback. So this is really important for a couple of reasons, but one is as you make big changes, so if it's a big idea you need to change, or maybe there's a big section that you need to add, or I hate it when you have to cut something, that might accidentally fix some of the smaller feedback issues if you're writing on a paper, for example. So I always say tackle the big things first, because you might not know how that might change all of like the little ideas, and you might inadvertently have fixed 3 other things and you didn't realize it. It also makes a good chunk of like a goal, right? Because it can be overwhelming if you have red marks all over your paper. Pick the 5 most important, and that gives you a chunk to work on, something that's attainable and you can do right away. And it also will give you momentum to move forward. And then also, after that point, or at the same time, determine if each point is actionable and what the action is. Because sometimes you might get feedback that's like, I'm trying to think of something that isn't actionable.
Vague.
Yeah, the word vague.
Very ironic feedback there.
That's true. So like, what do you do with that, right? That's something I would move down in my list because of things to tackle in order, because you don't really know what to do with that feedback is vague. Or if it's like you need more information here, well, then the action is it's either do more research and add it here, or extrapolate on that point, right? So those are very actionable items. And then once you have done the 5 most important that are actionable, is to either can pick another 5, work on those 5, or at that point it might be time to go and ask for clarification. So if anything is unclear, don't hesitate to either get a second opinion from someone else, or to go back to your faculty member and just say, hey, I didn't get this. Like, you're also going to be teaching them at the same time not to write vague on a paper because it's vague feedback, right? So like, they don't mind. As someone who teaches, I would love for someone to come say, I didn't understand this feedback. Can you please explain more? Than for someone to just ignore my feedback and not do anything with it. So that's not something that we mind doing. We don't mind coming back and saying like, yeah, I would love to talk to you about that more or anything. So don't be afraid to do that and ask for clarification, because you also don't want to waste your own time and energy spending an hour trying to figure out what they meant by a badly worded comment on your paper. So don't waste your time either, because your time is valuable. So those are the main ways to deal with feedback that I would add. Anything you would add here, Shamini, for the analyze portion of the steps?
No, I think you covered it all. The only thing about the clarification is, sometimes you have an action point that it's one way of checking, like somebody says, you need more X here, and you've determined, oh yeah, I can add this, to get us to just double check in the clarification step to say, is this a good set of actions to do? I know that has helped me, because then it helped the faculty member focus in and go, oh, well, actually, I meant theory X. I would have gone herring off in theory Y, right? So even if you have action items, checking that is, if you have the possibility to do that, good idea.
Yeah, and a great way to do this is actually to send a follow-up email afterwards, and thank them for taking their time to do something, because feedback takes time, right? So they are giving you their time because they think that you can get better. Don't forget that they're wanting you to do better as well. But also just a follow-up email saying, like, especially if it's an oral discussion, here's what we talked about. Here's going to be my steps going away. And just do a quick follow-up email. And then if they see anything wrong, they can be like, wait. Step 3 is wrong. That's not what I meant. Right. So it gives them a chance to just double check. And that's a quick and easy way to do that. Okay. There's one more step that I think is very important too, and that is reflection. So after you've you received the feedback and used it, and all of those steps are completed, it's time to reflect. And I know this is hard because we have so much time crunch in grad school a lot, right? We have so much that we're doing. just take a few minutes after your process is done and either you've sent off that next draft or you've finally turned that paper in or whatever, and reflect on how it went. So just because receiving feedback is a skill, what can help you build the skill faster is actually reflection. So what went well in that for you? Did you follow all of the steps we kind of outlined today? Did you skip any? Was that okay that you skipped those steps? Is there something you think you should have done next time? And just a quick reflection will help cement that practice and make it even easier next time. It'll help things flow faster. And I think that just if you want any skill to go faster, you should always just take a look and see how it was. So like after this, I used to play softball. And so like after a practice, if you'll sit for just a minute and say like, okay, how did practice go for me? Like, was there anything that I really needed to work on next time? Like that's just a great skill to have to make any skill building go faster. So that's what I consider the last step, technically, even though it's not one of the numbered steps. Okay, so we're almost at 1:00, and so we are scheduled to go to 12:30, but I know some people have class and stuff like that. So let me see. Okay, so were there any strategies that we didn't cover today that you can think of that we should, maybe if I give this presentation again, I should add, or that might help someone else here? Is there anything that we skipped that you think we should add to the list or anything like that?
Feedback.
Huh? Yeah, we want feedback. We want feedback.
I don't know if it's appropriate for this particular project or not, but I know just starting in on my thesis now, like I'm confused about what exactly, and this is why I think maybe it's related, but what exactly is the like roles and expectations for an advisor and a committee? Like, I think when we come into this process, you just kind of know I have to get an advisor and I have to get a committee, but like, I'm not really sure like what they do or what I'm supposed to expect of them or what I can expect of them or what's rude or what. So just like defining that whole relationship a little bit at the center of grad school feedback, I know would be like a session that would be helpful to me because I'm just kind of doing it. But if I knew more what that relationship is like intended to be and what the boundaries are meant to be, like would help me better identify the right people.
Yeah, that's a great comment. So 2 things about that. But that is really good. We should have a whole session on that. So
I was just thinking that's a whole webinar.
It looks like a whole thing. The first thing I would say is there are a bunch of advising videos. Shamini, could you see if you could find that
I'm going
to
find the link and bring it.
So they made a really nice set of professional videos that talk about advising at CGU, and Shamini will find it and put that link in the chat. But the other thing is this can vary from advisor to advisor, right? And so I think one of the best things that I've seen someone do is actually go to their advisor. And I've done this from mine. I've had 3 advisors actually because one didn't get tenure, one left for a new job. So, those things change. But I learned to sit down and say, how do you work? How do you like to work with students? Like, what do you want our relationship to be like? And it seems like a really weird question to ask someone, but different advisors definitely have different ideas of what to do with it. So some of them are saying, I'm very hands off. You can send me things and I'll review it. You can come talk to me if you want, but I'm just going to sit back. Other people are very hands on and they say, I want you to check in with me each month. Tell me what's going on, where the points are. We'll have a meeting. Thank you, Shamini. Shamini put that in the chat there for some of those videos. So I think the best piece of advice I would suggest is, besides we need to do a webinar on this, and we do, is to talk to your individual advisor and see what they want to do. Because there are some things like, your main advisor is going to be different from your committee, and your like a dissertation committee or a qualifying exam committee. They're all kind of different. And if you have an outside reader, that's a whole nother thing too. Trying to think, do we have any resources on that?
Currently, the advising videos will speak to some of this.
Okay.
So that's one. It's a series of 12 different videos, and they're all divided into small topics. So browse through them. I think we're going to take that. It's such a good idea. We could do a webinar on this or a big conversation. Yes.
If I may add, I just watched those videos because I'm starting in the fall, and I'm coming from a school where the culture is completely different. In fact, they reference that in the video. Like, I'm coming from a school where they don't really, advising is not really part of it. So it didn't seem to talk too much about like working with an advisor for a thesis or a committee. It was more about this like ongoing relationship that begins from the beginning. So
I think
that's what I noticed.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, that there is this general relationship you want to build. And especially if you are just coming into that, either coming into grad school or coming into the place where you're going to have the big project, a thesis, a dissertation. Setting the ground of building relationships is really important. But once you have that more formal, restricted space of a project, a thesis, a dissertation, then doing some of the things Shelby mentioned. Basically, the big idea there is meet with your guide and work out the lay of the land before you start the journey, right? Because you have also your own learner and professional way of working, and your own sort of context in which you have your limitations and restrictions and opportunities. They don't know that. And so a kind of planning meeting, it's not quite contractual, but take that idea of, before you write a contract, all the terms and conditions are agreed upon, sort of. It's more of but in that idea of how they like to work, which will help you manage your time and energy better.
And don't be afraid to ask for things, because I have had friends who said, they had a very hands-off professor, and the professor just was like, oh, do your thing. And then they said, that's not working for me. That's really not what she was working on her dissertation. She was like, I need feedback more regularly. I need that contact. And she told the professor that, and they were like, okay, you want to meet each week? So just because that might not be their style, that doesn't mean they're not willing to work with you, because they want you to succeed. And so if you need a weekly meeting, they're probably going to be fine with that, or a bi-weekly meeting, or if you want to check in once a month. So sometimes just saying, here's what I would like, can we do that? Is fine. And they'll jump on it and say, yeah, of course.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for sharing those videos. Cause I've been Jonathan, my dean, sent me like the formatting guidelines for the thesis, but like this page I've never seen, and I've been searching for it at like just anything I can from other universities, and like this never came up. So thank you. This is great.
And Violet also put into the chat, we have the Academic Success Kit binder. And there's a page. There are 10 like sections or chapters, whatever you want to call it, each one dealing with a different aspect of grad school. Everything from financial literacy to academic advising and mentoring. So chapter 2 or section 2 is a few pages. And the way this is structured is it gives you one page telling you the whys of this thing, what it's all about. And then it gives you 2 pages of really good questions, like an audit of your own process that might give you ideas of what you can do moving forward. So check that out.
And then just real quick before you all go, if you would help us out, and I'm going to launch a poll real quick. Just tell me or Shamini and I how we did, because we always like feedback and we like to know who we're working with. So as soon as the poll's done, this will be our official end to the webinar, because I know you all are busy people like we are. But we're going to stay around. We can stay for discussion and questions. We can talk about whatever y'all want. We can talk about the advisor stuff more. We can talk about feedback. But I just want to put this option out there. So I'm going to show you.